All right, for these last three exercises, I'm going to be using the gray base gray scales, but along with that, I'm going to add some color marker and then also some color pencil. Okay, color correction is basically this first one here. Think of it as you're drawing and you're trying to achieve a particular color or finish that, and you don't have the perfect marker for it, but you have something close, and then you have to correct it a little bit by adding another coat of marker to tone it down, or you need to add a coat of color pencil to lighten it. But you're basically correcting that color to make it a little bit more, a little bit closer to the actual color that you're trying to render. So in this first example, I'm just going to lay down a basic coat, 10% gray. Okay. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some gradual value change as my base coat. And what's nice about these markers is that the base coats will actually translate through the additional coats that we add to it. Okay, so I don't want this to appear too flat, so I'm going to create a base coat that isn't flat, that has a little bit of dimension, has some movement to it. Okay. All right, so just to kind of give you guys an example of how this can work, let's go ahead and I have my lime green, and I'm going to apply a coat of lime green on top of my gray. Okay, and actually I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fill in these other cubes as well. And you guys are welcome to play around with other colors. I just wanted to give you an example of how this idea of color correction works. Okay, build up. You can see here that my nib is starting to dry up a little bit, so I'm going to let that kind of recharge. But say that this green isn't quite what I'm after. It's maybe it's a little bit too green, or it's not green enough. So I'm going to go ahead and apply another coat, or a coat on this cube as well. Okay, so think of this as just like my first pass at the green. Okay, it's not quite what we're after. There's a few things we can do as far as color correction. We can apply another coat of green, and what I'll do just to show you the differences, I'm going to go over a third and apply another coat. Okay, so I'm correcting this green by making it a little bit darker, just with another layer of marker. Okay. Another thing we can do is actually come back with gray. If we want to darken it, we can say, oh, it's still much too vibrant, that green is too lively, so I'm going to tone it down by adding another coat of gray on top of that, and we'll pull that green back a little bit. That's not translating that great in this lighting and this camera setup, but you can tone colors down a little bit by adding a layer of gray. Another thing you can do is using a color that's opposite. Think of the color wheel. If we have a green here and we want to tone that down, we can take kind of a reddish color or an orange color to tone that green down. So what I have here is my mineral orange, and I'll do this like halfway across. I can tone down my green by adding a layer of this orange across. And here, again, kind of the shadow of my head is a little bit more accurate, but if I move it out, it gets a little bit washed out. But bringing this orange on top of the green obviously tones it down, makes it more kind of a brown color, but maybe that's a little bit too brown. I can come back with my green and do another layer on top of that, okay? And I can manipulate these colors by adding additional layers. Now, if I've done this, and the key to rendering is always keeping, you have your rendering that you're working on, but you always want to have a piece of scrap paper or margins around your rendering that you can practice and see how different layers of marker react to one another. Maybe we've ended up here with a color that just isn't quite what we were after. But say we take a green color pencil and we went on top of that. Maybe once we started to add color pencil on top of that, maybe that starts to help us get what we're after. Maybe that's not quite, maybe it's a little bit too dark still. We can come with our white color pencil and on top of that start to bring that value. We can bring that value up. Okay, so there's lots of ways we can manipulate color. We can add another layer of the color. We can add a layer of an opposite color, like a red over a green or a yellow over a purple, or vice versa, to tone those down. We can add additional layers of gray. One thing that I would caution is when you start getting into these darker values, it's a lot harder to bring them back up. There is some forgiveness when we start to add white color pencil, but you don't want to rely on that too much. But that's what I'm basically trying to say, is always start with light coats and then work your way into the darker values. If you start too dark, then it's a lot harder to bring up. Okay, just kind of to further the concept, if we have this layer and we're saying, oh, it feels a little bit too light, let's go ahead and add another coat of our green. But maybe that's still not quite what we're after. Here's just an example of what would happen if we were to add, this is lilac. If we were to add lilac on top of that green, what does that do? And then we can even start using the same concepts as gradual value change. We can actually do that with our colors as well, and get colors to kind of nicely bleed into each other. Okay, so play around with that. You could, just know that the markers are meant to be layered. Very rarely do we have like the perfect marker for a particular a particular color that we're trying to render, but we can manipulate these markers rather easily. Okay, let me pause here and then I'll get into added detail.